All right. Good morning. I'm uploading this video because we had some audio problems yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure this sermon was up for you guys that couldn't hear it. So that's the reason why. We're planning on getting that fixed as soon as possible when we figure out what the problem is, hopefully before this next Sunday. But that's why I'm doing this. This is Sunday's sermon, yesterday's sermon. And it kind of starts off with this. Last Wednesday night, we had probably one of the best lessons we've had in a long time, which is from Mike Wilhelm, who is the chaplain of Boys Ranch. And one of the things he's been teaching us about is how we should approach kids who may have difficulty in faith, and really approach any kid who's got difficult questions. People seek to have clarity. They want to know answers. And that night, he brought to us these pieces of paper these kids has written on these questions. And the questions were things like, why did mom and dad leave me? It was like, why does evil exist? Why do boys abuse me? Very difficult questions. And each and every one of us, I think even you, would probably have questions that you would like answered. Maybe for God, like, why did you create Satan in the first place? And in all truth, we really don't get the clarity we want in this life. And that's just something we need to understand. There was actually a guy by the name of John Kavanaugh who wanted clarity. He went to Calcutta. He went to go work in the houses of the dead with Mother Teresa, to get that right. And when he finally met with Mother Teresa, he said, would you pray for me? And she said, what do you want me to pray for? Could you pray that I would have clarity? And she said, no, clarity is the last thing you need to give up. And he said, but you've always had clarity. She said, no, I've never had clarity. I've always just trusted in God. So I'm going to pray that you would trust in God. And I think that's what we need to understand. We were not made to know all things, to have clarification on all things, but we are made to be a people who trust in something. And people often choose something to be trusting in, and it's often the wrong thing. The one thing we need to trust in is God, and that's the best thing we can trust in. That's what gives us perfect peace, is trusting in God. In Acts chapter 12, we see an illustration of the kind of perfect peace that I think each and every one of us needs. In Acts 12, Herod is intending to persecute the Christians, and so, sure enough, he arrests James. And then he executes him, and when he sees the Jews' reaction, he is just excited about what he's doing. And so he goes, and on a very public occasion, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he arrests Peter. And he's hoping to have a very public trial on the day of Passover, implying a very public execution. And one of the things I love about that is there in verse 5, it says that the church prayed fervently or earnestly. And that Greek word there almost means, it's kind of like it means they're straining, they're stretching to pray for him. And we see that in verse 6 that sure enough, Peter, while he is on trial the next day, and he is waiting for that time, possibly going to be executed, it says, verse 6, he is asleep. He's got these two guards on his sides, he's shackled, and he's so out of it that when this angel arrives with all this light, it still doesn't wake him up. And so it says that the angel looks down at him and it strikes him and, kicks him. It's like, wake up. And he wakes up and he stands up and the shackles fall off. He says, come on, let's go. And so they walk out of the prison. They walk out of the gates of the prison, past all these guards, down the street, a full street length, it says. And until finally the angel disappears. And he looks at his hand and he's like, I imagine him pinching himself because he thinks he's dreaming and he realizes he's not. God has done something miraculous. So then, he runs over to John Mark's mother's house, and he knocks on the door, and Rhoda answers, and she's so excited that she slams the door in his face and tells everybody, Peter's alive, he's here, and they think she's crazy, but he keeps on knocking. So they finally open the door, and they all see Peter, and they're so excited, they go, woohoo! And the thing he does is he says, shh, it's still late at night, guys, be quiet, be quiet. I love that scene. The next day, we see that Herod is just freaking out. They're cross-examining the guards. They can't find Peter, and they ultimately end up executing all the guards who were involved with Peter's arrest. And boy, if you think about that, those guards were all Jews. And what if you were one of those Jews that were all gung-ho about the arrest and the killing of these apostles, and now your son or your nephew, your brother, or whatever is one of those soldiers that got killed? Boy, you throw in with the wrong people. That's not good. Some time passes, and Herod goes to a trade agreement in Caesarea. The people of Tyre and Sidon need some things that Jerusalem produces. And he shows up, and they're wanting to really kiss up to him. And so he's up on this throne in these royal robes, and he's giving a speech, and they say, "Oh, this is the voice of God." And he does not correct them. And it says, because he does not correct them, God strikes him down with worms, and he dies. And the historian Josephus actually says that he dies about 5 days later with problems with his stomach, that these worms really caused an issue for him. The whole purpose of that scripture is to say that Herod, he fights against God and he fails. And when we see that occur, and we go back and we see how Peter's reacting, knowing that he's about to be on trial, knowing that he could be killed, that's what Herod wants to do, he is asleep. He has this peace that I think you and I wish we could have. And that's the kind of peace I want to talk about today. In Isaiah chapter 26, the ESV verse 3-4 says, "You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock." I like that. He says, trust in the Lord forever. That's my point. Trust in God. He's asking God, keep them in perfect peace, whose mind is focused on you because they trust in you. Therefore, trust in God. Let's first talk about perfect peace. Perfect peace is very difficult for us to imagine. We can imagine peace. We think about world peace. We think about people laying down their arms, no nuclear war. But we're talking about perfect peace here. And perfect peace is much more difficult to understand. So the best place to go is Philippians chapter 4. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Verse 4. "I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." What kind of peace is this? It's the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's something that we don't understand. It's perfect, right? He says, in order to get this, you should rejoice always, that you should leave your anxieties behind, instead replace them with thanksgiving, that you should pray. He says that you should focus on good things. We focus on the worst things in this world. There's so many things to get distracted by with the news cycle or whatever. We focus on the worst possible things. He says focus on good things. Practice good things, and the God of peace will be with you. The main thing that we need to understand is that perfect peace, according to Isaiah, means that you've got to trust in God. You have to trust in God in order to get to perfect peace. Otherwise, it's not perfect. He says, what's interesting is if you imagine Isaiah's words on a river, you might see that perfect peace would be at the mouth of the river where you'd catch the fish. And that if you looked further up the river, upstream, you would see that it would be focus. And then further upstream yet, and you would find something even better than that. And so let's look further upstream at that focus, that concept of focus, which feeds into that perfect peace. Perfect peace is brought about by a mind focused on God. Think about it. Focus is so important. We understand that. When I was growing up, Michael Jordan was my favorite basketball player. And number 23, right? And he got where he was because of focus. He focused on basketball and he would practice 8 hours a day. Steve Jobs, he focused, right? Steve Jobs said, focus and simplicity. Once you get there, you can move mountains. You can almost hear him quoting Jesus, but of course, he misses out on Christ. He's talking about money. He's talking about success in this world. So he's only partially right. Focus is important, right? But it's not everything. You see, the Pharisees focused on what? God's law. Why did they focus on God's law? Because they trusted in their own abilities to save. Think about Isaiah. Keep in perfect peace those who focus their minds on you because they trust you. The Pharisees focused on God's law because they thought that they could save themselves. Jesus, however, focused on God's will and God because he trusted God. Therefore, he received peace. Peter also is the same. He focuses on Jesus and his will, and he's there in the prison. He falls asleep. Why? Because he trusts in Jesus. You know, one thing Jesus told him is, first he told James that you would drink of my cup. In other words, you're going to die. James did die, first martyr. We just read that. But Peter, right after that, he says, when you're an old man, you're going to be taken where you don't want to go. He's referring to Peter's death. He says, you're going to be an old man. Peter listens to him. He trusts in the words of Jesus. And because of what Jesus has said, he knows while he's in that prison, I'm too young to die. Jesus has said it. For perfect peace, you must focus. Romans 8:5 says, those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. If we focus on spiritual things, we'll have spiritual outcome. If we focus on fleshly things, we'll have fleshly outcome. As Christians, we're supposed to focus on spiritual things. Perfect peace requires a focus on God. And yet, when we look further upstream, we see because you trust him. And that's what we need to talk about now. Trust is very important. If you want to find one of my favorite stories on trust, it's Abraham. Abraham really trusted God. God said, you're going to have a son. He had a son named Isaac. And he says, now take Isaac up and take him up the mountain, sacrifice him. Now, this isn't just any old son. This is the son that he has told him that his covenant will be brought about through. The promises will come through him. The descendants, the nation will be through him. And he does. He listens to God. Why in the world, Abraham, would you do that? If he's the one through whom all those things come, why would you therefore say, okay, I'll just kill him? We get the answer in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. You see, he realized that since God said something and he was trustworthy, that he would keep his promise, there was no reason not to obey. It's very important for us to understand that if we are kept in perfect peace, we have a mind focused on God because we trust on God. You see, our trust of God brings about a focus and obedience, which then brings about this kind of perfect peace. But what you trust really matters. What you trust in really matters. You know, there was a fellow by the name of Danny Williams. He was 25 years old. He was living in Florida in 2004 when the Hurricane Charlie came through. And he was in his house, and it was getting wrecked by that hurricane, so he fled. He ran out of the house underneath a 55-year-old banyan tree in his front yard, a tree that he always sought refuge under. And his family recalled how he always went there for peace, for quiet, for protection. Except that day, when he ran out underneath that 55-year-old tree, the winds blew it down on top of him and killed him. You see, what you put your trust in really does matter. People often forget that there is a required ingredient when you're talking about peace in life. And you've been hearing it this whole time. Keep him in perfect peace. Who keeps him in perfect peace? God, right? See, peace is not a horizontal problem. Now, we treat it like it is, like if you're angry with me and then I forgive you, or I ask for forgiveness to clear that up, we reconcile, and that's good. We ought to do that. But it's not just a horizontal problem. We look at Russia and Ukraine, and they've got all kinds of difficulties going on, and it's problems between two people or two nations. We think, oh, that's a horizontal problem. It's not. Remember, you and I could conceive of peace if we were to write an essay about peace, but we're not talking about peace. We're talking about perfect peace. And perfect peace is not, it's not something that we can't comprehend, and we need to realize it is not a horizontal problem. That's why Isaiah says, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Peace is something that can only be achieved with Christ. And when we're talking about perfect peace, it certainly can only be achieved with Christ. You cannot separate him. I don't care if you go to the top of a beautiful, peaceful mountain, you're not going to find perfect peace. You can go to a guru in India who knows all about peace and talk to him, and he will not give you perfect peace. You go to a Tai Chi class to try to find peace with your body, won't happen. You go to a self-help book to try to find out about peace, or watch somebody on YouTube to find out about perfect peace, and you're not going to get it. It's not possible. Here's another thing. I don't care what surgeon you go to. You will not find perfect peace with surgery to try to correct some problem you think God may have had. You will not find perfect peace because it's not a horizontal problem about you and what people think of you or how you even see yourself in the mirror. That's still horizontal. You won't find perfect peace if you tell people they have to call you something or change their vocabulary or redefine words in order to make you happy, because that's still horizontal. You're thinking about what people think about you. That doesn't give you perfect peace. Perfect peace is vertical. Perfect peace is not detachable from him who keeps us in it. Perfect peace comes from a perfect God, from a perfect Son, from a perfect Spirit. It cannot be separated from God. It's very easy for us to overcomplicate perfect peace, and that's one problem with giving a sermon about it. Is it's possible I could overcomplicate it. We get too in the weeds, too theological, all those things. So let me share this illustration with you to hopefully help you. There was once a kid who was wanting to find peace, and so he got a piece of paper at church, and he wrote down all the things that he wanted to do for God and all the things he wanted to sacrifice. And he thought that just giving that to God would give him perfect peace. So he went and he put up on the altar, like, God, here you go. And nothing happened. And so he went home, he thought about it, and he said, okay, I'm going to write more. I'm going to put more things I need to do and more things that I need to sacrifice to get perfect peace. And he went, and the next Sunday he put that on the altar. And still nothing happened. He thought he would have peace. He didn't have peace. So he went and he talked to his pastor. His pastor scratched his chin and he gave him a small piece of paper and he said, I just want you to think of one thing, the most important thing you can give Christ. One. And so he went home and he thought about it. Finally, he wrote down 2 words and he brought them to church the next Sunday. And he put them on the altar and he began to weep. The reason for it is because he took away all the things we as human beings ought to do, and he simply thought about the beauty and the centrality of what must happen. You see, those 2 words were his first and his last name. He simply wanted to give himself. You see, if you want perfect peace, first you need to trust in God And when you trust in God, you start to focus on him and you start to be obedient to him. And it's just something that starts to happen through sanctification. And peace is something that you start to get in life, so that no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how difficult it is, no matter the prognosis, no matter the economic issues, there's still this sense of peace. Everything will be okay. God will take care of me. My question for you today is, do you focus on God? Do you focus on godly things? And do you do it because you trust in God? It's very important to ask yourself that. Are you focusing on church? Are you focusing on your home life with your children? Or are you focusing on phones and computers and games and your addictions? We want to make sure we're focusing on good things. But not only that, we want to make sure we're focusing on good things because of a relationship we have with God. We trust in him, and that empowers everything we do through the Spirit, so that then we get that peace we're looking for. You, God, keep him in perfect peace, who has his mind set on you because he trusts you. So, trust in God. He is the living rock. Thank you very much. God bless.